Ma'am, please don't touch the painting. Claire Whitmore grabbed the man's wrist before security could notice him standing too close to the centerpiece of the gallery. Her voice came out softer than she intended, almost swallowed by the low hum of violins and crystal laughter drifting through the enormous room. The man looked down at her hand on his sleeve, surprised but calm. Around them, golden light spilled from chandeliers shaped like frozen waterfalls, reflecting across polished marble floors so glossy they mirrored the shoes of the wealthy guests gliding through the private exhibition like royalty. Claire immediately let go, her cheeks burning. "I'm sorry," she whispered quickly. "I just thought, if one of the curators saw you touching it." She stopped herself. The man wore a charcoal suit that looked older than the designer tuxedos surrounding them. No watch. No flashy cufflinks. No security beside him. Just quiet gray eyes studying the painting like it meant something personal. Claire assumed he worked there. Maybe maintenance. Maybe lighting. Definitely not one of the collectors sipping $1,000 wine beneath the towering oil paintings. Behind her, a sharp laugh sliced through the room. "Honestly," Vanessa Holloway said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "the help is getting very protective tonight." A few people chuckled into their champagne glasses. Claire felt the familiar sting crawl up the back of her neck. She had spent her entire life recognizing that sound. The sound rich people made when they looked at someone and decided they mattered less. She lowered her eyes toward the polished floor, suddenly aware of every detail about herself. Her black dress came from a thrift store downtown. The hem had been repaired twice by hand. Tiny flecks of dried paint still clung beneath her fingernails from restoring antique frames in her tiny apartment until 2 in the morning. Around her floated diamond necklaces, silk gowns, watches worth more than her mother's hospital bills. The gallery itself felt less like a building and more like a cathedral built for wealthy people to worship themselves. Velvet silence hung beneath the music. The air smelled of expensive perfume, old wood varnish, and red wine. Massive paintings towered against charcoal walls under perfect museum lighting. Everything gleamed. Everything whispered money. And somehow, standing in the center of all that luxury, the quiet man beside her seemed more out of place than she did. But he didn't react to Vanessa's insult. He simply turned back toward the painting. It was a haunting portrait of a woman sitting alone beside a rain-covered window, her face caught between grief and peace. The gold plaque beneath it read, "Solitude in Winter." Estimated value, $40 million. "Do you know why this painting matters?" the man asked quietly. Claire blinked, caught off guard. Most people at events like this never asked what art meant. Only what it cost. She glanced at the painting again, drawn into the pale sadness in the woman's eyes. "Because she looks lonely," Claire said softly. "Not dramatic lonely. Real lonely. Like the kind people hide once they become too tired to explain it." The man stared at her for a moment. Completely still. Somewhere across the gallery, glasses clinked and wealthy investors laughed beneath the warm chandelier glow. But near the painting, the silence suddenly felt heavier. Different. As if something invisible had just shifted between them. The man did not answer right away. He kept his eyes on the painting, on the lonely woman trapped forever behind layers of cracked oil and fading light. Then, almost quietly enough to disappear beneath the violin music, he said, "Most people here only see the signature in the corner." Claire looked around the gallery again. He was right. Groups of wealthy collectors floated from painting to painting with rehearsed smiles and glasses of dark wine balanced delicately in their hands. They spoke in numbers, not emotions. $40 million. Private bidder. European acquisition. Tax write-off. Nobody talked about loneliness. Nobody talked about grief. The enormous gallery glowed beneath soft amber lighting that made every gold frame shimmer like treasure pulled from the ocean floor. Waiters in white gloves moved silently through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne and tiny hors d'oeuvres that looked too delicate to touch. Somewhere deeper inside the building, a string quartet played beneath ceilings nearly 30 feet high. The entire place smelled of polished walnut, old canvas, and expensive perfume. Claire suddenly became aware that she had not eaten since noon. You work here long? She asked carefully, still assuming the man was part of the staff. The corner of his mouth moved slightly, almost a smile. Long enough to know people rarely notice the ones keeping things together. Something about the answer settled heavily in her chest. Claire understood invisible people. Her mother had cleaned office buildings in downtown Boston for nearly 20 years before heart disease forced her to stop. Claire still remembered being 12 years old and waiting quietly in empty corporate lobbies while her mother vacuumed carpets beneath fluorescent lights after midnight. Rich people walked past them every day without making eye contact. Sometimes they spoke about them like they were furniture. Sometimes worse. She swallowed the memory and looked back toward the painting. I restore frames for small galleries, she admitted softly. Mostly damaged pieces nobody important cares about. And yet you notice the varnish aging on this one from 6 feet away, the man replied. Claire blinked. What? He nodded toward the portrait. The upper finish coat. You looked at it before you looked at the plaque. Her stomach tightened slightly. Most people never notice details like that. Old habits, she said carefully. Paintings tell the truth if you stare at them long enough. This time the man smiled fully, though there was sadness hidden behind it. Before he could answer, sharp heels clicked across the marble floor toward them. Vanessa Holloway appeared beside a cluster of investors wrapped in diamonds and silk, her crimson lipstick curved into a polished smile that never reached her eyes. There you are, she said to the man without even looking directly at him. The lighting near the east wall is terrible. Someone should really fix it before the auction begins. Claire immediately stepped back, assuming she had accidentally distracted an employee from his work. Sorry, she murmured again. But the man did not move. Vanessa finally looked at him properly, irritation flickering across her face. Did you hear me? She asked colder this time. For one strange second, the air between them tightened like a pulled wire. Then the man simply nodded once. Calm. Controlled. I heard you. Vanessa rolled her eyes and turned away toward the crowd, already dismissing him from her thoughts. Claire watched her disappear beneath the golden gallery lights before quietly whispering, People like her must be exhausting. The man stared after Vanessa for a long moment. You have no idea. Claire should have walked away after that. People like Vanessa Holloway belonged to a world that punished anyone who stayed visible too long. But somehow, standing beside the quiet man near the painting felt easier than facing the glittering crowd alone. Across the gallery, wealthy collectors drifted beneath golden light like actors inside a movie Claire could never afford to enter. Their laughter bounced softly against the high ceilings. Diamonds flashed beneath crystal chandeliers. Waiters carried trays filled with smoked salmon and tiny pastries smaller than the palm of her hand. Everything in the room was elegant, expensive, and carefully controlled. Everything except the strange calm she felt beside him. You do not sound like staff, Claire admitted quietly. The man glanced at her. And you do not sound like someone who belongs in the background. The words caught her off guard. Most people look straight through her. Especially in places like this. Claire folded her arms gently, suddenly self-conscious again beneath the soft gallery lights. Trust me, she said with a small nervous laugh. I definitely belong in the background. She looked down at her worn shoes reflected against the marble floor. I almost did not come tonight. Then why did you? He asked. Claire hesitated. Nobody here cared about honest answers. But something about him made pretending feel exhausting. Because my mother told me if I spend my whole life hiding from rich people, eventually I will start believing they are better than me. The man grew quiet again. Somewhere behind them, a burst of applause rose from another wing of the gallery as a new collector arrived. Cameras flashed briefly against dark walls lined with priceless art. Claire watched the crowd shift like moving gold beneath the chandeliers. My mother used to clean buildings downtown, she continued softly. At night, after offices closed. She always said wealthy people walk faster than everyone else because they never expect life to stop them. The man looked at her carefully. Was she right? Claire smiled faintly, though sadness touched the edges of it. Mostly. For a moment neither of them spoke. The violin music drifted lower now, softer, mixing with the quiet clinking of crystal glasses and distant conversations about auctions and investments. Then the man surprised her. My father hated events like this, he said. Claire blinked. Really? He nodded once, eyes still resting on the painting. He believed art was supposed to humble people, not inflate them. Something about the way he said father carried weight behind it. Old weight. Claire noticed the faint silver streaks at his temples beneath the warm lighting. The exhaustion hidden behind his calm expression. He did not carry himself like the wealthy men filling the room. There was no performance in him. No need to impress anyone. Before Claire could answer, a loud voice suddenly cut across the gallery. Ladies and gentlemen, the auction preview will begin in 15 minutes. The announcement echoed gently through the room. Instantly, the crowd shifted toward the grand central hall where the featured painting collection waited behind velvet ropes. Claire instinctively stepped aside to avoid blocking guests dressed in tuxedos and silk gowns. One man brushed past her shoulder without apology, nearly spilling champagne onto her dress. Excuse me, he muttered flatly, though it sounded more annoyed than sincere. Claire lowered her eyes automatically. Old reflex. Invisible reflex. But beside her, the quiet man did not move. He watched the wealthy crowd flowing toward the auction hall with an expression Claire could not fully read. Not anger. Not admiration either. Something colder. More tired. Then, almost under his breath, he said, "It is amazing how easily people mistake money for character." Claire turned toward him slowly. Before she could answer, a sharply dressed man near the center of the gallery suddenly shouted for security. And for the first time that evening, the elegant atmosphere inside the room cracked. The music did not stop immediately. That was the strange part. Violins still floated softly beneath the chandeliers while panic quietly spread across the gallery like spilled ink. Guests turned toward the commotion near the auction hall entrance, their polished conversations dissolving into whispers. Claire saw a tall man in a navy tuxedo pushing through the crowd with visible panic written across his face. Marcus Bell, the gallery's chief curator. Earlier that week, Claire had read an interview where he called himself a guardian of cultural legacy. Tonight he looked more like a man watching his career collapse in real time. Nobody goes near the painting. Marcus snapped sharply at the security guards gathering near the velvet ropes. Do you understand me? The crowd shifted uneasily beneath the warm amber lights. Crystal glasses paused halfway to lips. Wealthy collectors exchanged nervous glances while cameras from invited media guests slowly turned toward the center of the room. Claire instinctively stepped closer to see what had happened. Near the middle of the grand hall stood the gallery's featured masterpiece, a massive oil painting displayed alone beneath a circular spotlight. Earlier it had looked untouchable, glowing against charcoal walls like royalty on a throne. Now tension wrapped around it so tightly the air itself seemed thinner. What is going on? Claire whispered. Beside her, the quiet man studied the room carefully. His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. Then Claire heard it. Forgery. The word moved through the crowd like electricity. One collector muttered it first. Then another. Suddenly everyone was whispering it beneath the chandeliers. Forgery. Fake. Impossible. Claire's stomach tightened. Marcus hurried toward a silver-haired investor standing beside the painting, trying desperately to lower his voice. It did not work. You guaranteed authenticity. The investor barked loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Do you have any idea what this scandal could cost? Around them, nervous laughter vanished completely. The elegant atmosphere that had filled the gallery an hour ago was gone now, replaced by the cold metallic smell of fear hidden beneath perfume and expensive wine. Claire stared toward the painting. Something felt wrong immediately. Not dramatic wrong. Subtle wrong. The same feeling she got restoring damaged frames when a replacement piece did not belong to the original structure. Tiny inconsistencies. Tiny lies. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The spotlight reflected strangely across the surface of the canvas. Too evenly. Too clean. Before she realized what she was doing, Claire stepped forward through the crowd. "Claire!" the quiet man said softly beside her, warning hidden in his tone. But she barely heard him. The painting pulled at her attention now. Every instinct she had sharpened over years of restoration work suddenly woke up at once. The crowd around her blurred beneath gold light and crystal reflections. She focused only on the brushwork, the varnish, the texture. And then she saw it. Her pulse skipped. "Oh no!" she whispered under her breath. Marcus was still arguing with the investor when Claire spoke louder without meaning to. "The finished coat is new." Silence hit the nearby crowd almost instantly. A few guests turned toward her. Marcus froze mid-sentence before slowly looking over. Claire immediately wished she could disappear into the marble floor. But it was too late now. Marcus stared at her black thrift store dress, the dried paint beneath her fingernails, the obvious fact that she did not belong among billionaire collectors and famous curators. His expression hardened immediately. "And who exactly are you?" he asked coldly. Claire swallowed. "I restore antique frames and paintings for independent galleries." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. Around him, a few wealthy guests smirked quietly into their champagne glasses. "Wonderful," Marcus said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Now apparently every repair technician in Boston is an art expert." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the room. Claire felt heat flood her face. But beside her, the quiet man did not laugh. Not even a little. Claire wished the laughter bothered her less. But humiliation had a way of finding every old bruise a person tried to bury. She felt it now beneath the soft chandelier glow, standing in front of wealthy strangers while Marcus Bell looked at her like she was dirt tracked across an expensive carpet. Around them, whispers spread through the gallery in nervous waves. Investors kept glancing between the painting and Marcus with growing unease. The auction hall no longer felt elegant. It felt fragile. Like one wrong sentence could crack the entire room apart. Claire lowered her eyes briefly, fighting the instinct to apologize simply for existing. She had done that too much already in life. Apologize for being poor. Apologize for taking space. Apologized for knowing things people with money assumed she could not possibly understand. Marcus crossed his arms sharply. "The authentication on this collection was handled by experts from Europe," he announced confidently to the surrounding guests. "Not by someone repairing flea market frames in an apartment somewhere." A few people chuckled again. Vanessa Holloway lifted her champagne glass with visible amusement. Claire felt the heat rise into her cheeks. But before she could step back, the quiet man beside her finally spoke. "Then you should have no problem letting her explain what she noticed." His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that made people stop talking without understanding why. Marcus turned toward him with irritation already forming across his face. "This matter does not concern maintenance staff," he snapped dismissively. Claire immediately stepped in. "It is okay," she said softly, not wanting the man dragged into embarrassment because of her. "I should not have said anything." But the quiet man did not look at Marcus. He looked only at Claire. "You saw something," he said. "What was it?" The room seemed smaller suddenly. Hotter. Claire became painfully aware of the dozens of eyes now fixed on her beneath the golden lights. Even the violin music from the far end of the gallery had faded into silence. She swallowed carefully. "The varnish coating," she said at last. "It reflects too evenly under direct light." Marcus rolled his eyes dramatically. "That proves nothing." Claire nodded quickly. "By itself, no. But older paintings breathe differently beneath restoration layers. Tiny imperfections form naturally over time. This surface is too smooth." She stepped slightly closer to the painting, careful not to cross the velvet barrier. "And the crackling pattern near the lower edge repeats itself every few inches." A few nearby collectors frowned now, leaning closer. Claire pointed carefully toward the lower section of the canvas. Natural aging does not repeat perfectly. Artificial distress patterns do. Silence. Real silence this time. One investor lowered his champagne glass slowly. Another stepped closer to examine the painting himself. Marcus's confidence flickered for the first time all evening. That is absurd, he said quickly, though his voice sounded tighter now. You cannot determine authenticity from 6 feet away. No, Claire admitted quietly. But I can tell when something is pretending to be older than it really is. The words settled heavily into the room. Across the gallery, cameras from invited media guests subtly tilted toward the unfolding scene. Wealthy collectors who had ignored Claire minutes earlier now stared at her with uneasy curiosity. Marcus noticed it too, and panic flashed behind his polished expression. Enough, he snapped suddenly. Security, please escort her away from the auction area. 2 guards near the entrance hesitated awkwardly. Claire stepped back immediately, embarrassed all over again. Of course, this was how it ended. People like Marcus always won rooms like this. Not because they were smarter. Because they were believed first. She lowered her eyes, preparing to leave quietly before things became worse. Then the quiet man beside her finally stepped forward. Just one step. But somehow the entire room shifted with him. The movement was subtle, quiet, but powerful enough to stop the security guards where they stood. The man beside Claire stepped forward with one hand resting calmly inside his coat pocket, his expression unreadable beneath the warm gallery lights. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand attention. Somehow, attention found him anyway. No one is escorting her anywhere, he said evenly. The words cut through the room cleaner than any shout could have. Marcus Bell stared at him in disbelief for half a second before irritation returned to his face. Sir, this is an internal gallery matter, he replied tightly. I would appreciate it if staff remained professional and stopped interfering. Claire felt her stomach sink immediately. She hated this. The tension. The eyes staring at them. The quiet humiliation crawling through the marble hall beneath crystal chandeliers and $40 million paintings. She leaned toward the man softly. Please, she whispered. It is okay. I should leave. But he ignored the comment entirely. Instead, he looked back toward the painting. You authenticated this piece personally? He asked Marcus. The curator straightened immediately, sensing judgment hidden beneath the question. I supervised the acquisition process alongside internationally recognized experts. That was not my question. Silence. Tiny but sharp. A few collectors nearby exchanged uncertain glances. Claire noticed something shifting now. Earlier, people looked at the man beside her like invisible staff. Maintenance. Lighting. Somebody unimportant. But the longer he spoke, the more the atmosphere around him changed. Wealthy people were suddenly paying attention without understanding why. Marcus folded his arms. Yes, he answered carefully this time. I personally approved the authentication. The man nodded once. Interesting. Nothing more. Just one word. But Marcus's jaw tightened immediately. Claire looked between them, confused by the sudden imbalance in the room. Then the silver-haired investor near the painting stepped closer. If there is even a chance this work is fraudulent, he said sharply, the auction stops now. A wave of whispers spread instantly through the gallery. Cameras shifted again. One woman quietly lowered her phone from recording. Another collector muttered something about legal liability beneath his breath. The elegant atmosphere that once smelled of expensive wine and polished wood now carried the sharp metallic scent of panic. Marcus forced out a stiff smile clearly meant to calm the room. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no reason for concern. We are discussing the observations of an unverified restoration assistant. Claire flinched slightly at the words. Unverified. Assistant. The kind of labels designed to make someone sound smaller than they were. She had heard them her entire life. But before Marcus could continue, the quiet man turned toward Claire again. Tell them the rest. Claire blinked nervously. There is more? He asked gently. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay quiet now. Wealthy rooms had rules. People like her were allowed to clean them, not challenge them. But then she looked back at the painting. And once she saw the flaw, she could not unsee it. The signature, she admitted softly. Marcus laughed immediately. Please do not tell me we are taking art criticism from someone who repairs flea market portraits. A few nervous guests laughed with him this time, though weaker than before. Claire ignored it. Her eyes stayed on the painting. The artist signed with a sable brush during his late period, she explained quietly. Very thin pressure strokes. But this signature was done heavier. Faster. The room slowly quieted again. Claire stepped closer to the velvet rope carefully, studying the lower corner of the canvas beneath the spotlight. Whoever copied it understood the painting, she whispered. But they did not understand the painter. Complete silence followed. Marcus's confident expression flickered for the second time that evening. Tiny. Barely visible. But enough. The quiet man beside Claire noticed it immediately. And for the first time all night, a coldness entered his eyes that made even the nearest investors unconsciously step back. The silence inside the gallery no longer felt elegant. It felt dangerous. The kind of silence that settles over wealthy rooms when money senses risk. Nobody laughed now. Nobody sipped champagne. Beneath the golden chandeliers and towering oil paintings, every eye stayed locked on Claire Whitmore and the quiet man standing beside her. Marcus Bell tried to recover first. Men like him always did. Claire could almost see the calculation happening behind his polished smile as he searched for a way to regain control of the room. This has become completely inappropriate, Marcus announced sharply. We are discussing a certified masterpiece, not entertaining conspiracy theories from amateur restorers. Claire opened her mouth to answer, but the silver-haired investor interrupted him first. Then prove her wrong. The words landed heavily beneath the vaulted ceiling. Marcus blinked once. Excuse me? If she is wrong, the investor continued coldly, you should have no issue verifying the piece in front of witnesses. A murmur spread through the collectors surrounding them. Uneasy agreement. Uneasy fear. Claire noticed how quickly confidence disappeared when rich people thought millions of dollars might vanish with it. Marcus straightened his tuxedo jacket carefully. Tiny beads of sweat had appeared near his temples beneath the warm gallery lights. Authentication procedures are delicate, he replied. They cannot simply be performed in the middle of an event. Convenient, the quiet man beside Claire said softly. Marcus turned toward him immediately. And who exactly are you to question how this gallery operates? This time the room did not move. No music. No whispers. Even the waiters carrying silver trays had stopped walking. Claire looked toward the man beside her nervously. But he remained calm. Almost impossibly calm. He stepped closer toward the painting, studying it beneath the spotlight, while reflections from crystal chandeliers danced faintly across the canvas surface. The lower pigment layering is inconsistent, he said quietly. Marcus froze. Claire stared at him in surprise. The man continued without raising his voice. The original artist used lead white mixed with walnut oil during this period. The underlayer here reflects titanium white instead. The silence deepened instantly. Claire's pulse skipped. That was not casual knowledge. That was expert knowledge. Marcus's face lost color so quickly it almost seemed unreal beneath the golden lighting. That is impossible, he snapped too quickly. The quiet man finally looked at him directly. Is it? For the first time all evening, Marcus Bell looked afraid. Real fear. Not embarrassment. Not irritation. Fear. Claire suddenly realized something unsettling. This man beside her had known exactly what he was looking at from the beginning. He had not stumbled into the conversation accidentally. He had been watching. Testing. The silver-haired investor stepped forward again. Remove the painting from the auction immediately, he ordered coldly. until independent authentication is completed. Several collectors immediately began murmuring into their phones. One woman quietly walked away from the bidding area altogether. Another investor muttered something about lawyers. The gallery's perfect atmosphere was collapsing inch by inch beneath the soft amber lights. Marcus noticed it too. Panic sharpened his voice. Nobody leaves this hall until we settle this professionally. Professionally? Claire repeated softly before she could stop herself. Marcus turned toward her with open hostility now. You have done enough damage already. The words hit harder than she expected. Because part of her still believed them. She looked down at her worn black dress reflected against the polished marble floor. She did not belong here. She never had. People like Marcus built entire worlds designed to remind people like her of that fact. But then the quiet man beside her spoke again. And everything changed. No, he said calmly. The damage was done long before she arrived tonight. Marcus stared at him. What is that supposed to mean? The man reached slowly into the inside pocket of his charcoal coat. The entire room seemed to hold its breath at once. Then he removed a small silver keycard embossed with a black crest. Claire saw Marcus Bell's face drain completely white the second he recognized it. The entire gallery stared at the silver keycard in the man's hand as though it had suddenly become more valuable than the paintings surrounding them. Marcus Bell stopped breathing for a moment. Claire saw it happen. The confidence vanished from his face so quickly it almost looked painful. Beneath the golden chandelier light, his polished smile cracked apart inch by inch. That is not possible, Marcus whispered before he could stop himself. The quiet man looked at him calmly. Actually, he replied softly, it is. Nobody moved. The marble hall had become completely still except for the faint hum of climate control moving through the massive building. Somewhere far away, a champagne glass lightly touched another with a delicate clink that sounded strangely loud in the silence. Claire looked down at the silver crest stamped onto the keycard. Vale and Mercer Galleries. She had seen the emblem before in magazines and restoration journals. Every serious artist in the country knew the name. Vale and Mercer owned some of the most prestigious private collections in North America. Museums borrowed from them. Billionaires competed for invitations into their auctions. Her pulse began to pound slowly in her chest. The quiet man beside her finally slipped the card back into his coat pocket. My name is Ethan Vale, he said. The room seemed to physically recoil. Gasps spread softly through the crowd. One collector nearly dropped his champagne glass. Vanessa Holloway's face drained of color beneath her perfect makeup. Even the security guards immediately straightened where they stood. Claire felt her mind go completely blank. Ethan Vale. She knew the name. Everyone in the art world knew the name. But nobody recognized him because he never appeared publicly. There were rumors about him everywhere. Billionaire collector. Private investor. Reclusive owner of an international gallery empire. Some people claimed he bought paintings anonymously just to return them to museums for free. Others claimed he had not attended one of his own gallery openings in nearly a decade. And she had grabbed his wrist earlier like he was maintenance staff. Heat rushed into Claire's face so quickly she thought she might disappear from embarrassment entirely. But Ethan did not even look at her. His attention stayed fixed on Marcus Bell, who now looked as though the polished marble floor might collapse beneath him at any second. Mr. Vale, Marcus said quickly, voice suddenly thin with panic. I can explain this misunderstanding. Ethan's expression remained perfectly calm. That somehow made it worse. Please do, he replied. Marcus swallowed hard. Around them, wealthy collectors leaned closer beneath the warm amber lights, hungry now in the way rich people became hungry when powerful people started falling. The auction no longer mattered. The spectacle did. The authentication team assured us the acquisition was legitimate, Marcus explained rapidly. We followed every standard procedure. Ethan glanced toward the painting again. And yet a restoration artist noticed the forgery within minutes. Silence. Sharp and humiliating. Claire lowered her eyes instinctively. She did not want attention anymore. Not from these people. Not from him. But then Ethan turned toward her fully for the first time since revealing his name. "Claire," he said gently. Her breath caught slightly hearing him say it. "Would you tell them exactly how you knew?" The entire room shifted toward her again. Wealthy collectors. Investors. Security. Cameras. Everyone waiting. Claire's hands trembled faintly at her sides. She had spent years being invisible in rooms exactly like this. Years restoring damaged paintings for clients who never remembered her name 5 minutes later. And now one of the most powerful men in the art world was asking her to speak while everyone else listened. She swallowed carefully, forcing herself to breathe. "The painting is emotionally accurate," she said quietly. "That is why the forgery works." The room stayed completely silent. Claire stepped closer to the spotlight illuminating the massive canvas. "The forger copied the sadness perfectly," she continued. "But they painted sadness the way people imagine it looks. Not the way this artist actually painted it." Ethan watched her closely now. Not like a billionaire. Not like an owner. Like someone seeing something rare. "The original artist always hid warmth somewhere inside grief," Claire whispered softly. "A small detail. A soft color. Hope hidden inside loneliness." Her eyes lifted toward the painting one final time. "This one has none." No one spoke after that. The silence spreading through the gallery felt almost sacred now, as though the paintings themselves were listening. Claire stood beneath the warm spotlight with her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Across from her, billionaires and collectors stared with expressions she recognized instantly. Not kindness. Not respect yet. Surprise. The kind wealthy people wore when someone invisible suddenly became impossible to ignore. Ethan Vale remained perfectly still beside her, his gray eyes never leaving her face. Claire had spent most of her life around men who interrupted women the second they sounded intelligent. Especially poor women. But Ethan listened carefully, as though every word mattered. That frightened her more than the crowd. Marcus Bell forced out a brittle laugh that cracked in the middle. "This is becoming absurd," he snapped. "Art is subjective. Emotional interpretation proves nothing." Claire lowered her eyes slightly. Part of her wished he was right. It would have been easier if she had imagined it all. Easier if she could disappear quietly back into her tiny apartment restoring forgotten frames while the wealthy returned to pretending their world was flawless. But the painting still sat beneath the spotlight like a beautiful lie. And now everyone in the room could feel it. Ethan finally spoke again. "Remove the painting from display," he said calmly. The words landed like a judge's verdict. Marcus took a sharp breath. "Mr. Vale, if we halt the auction now, the press fallout alone could cost millions." Ethan's expression never changed. "Then perhaps you should have verified the collection before attaching my family name to it." Family name. The phrase echoed softly through the marble hall. Claire noticed how quickly people straightened after hearing it. Investors who earlier ignored Ethan now watched him with careful attention. Security guards stood rigid near the entrance. Even Vanessa Holloway had gone completely silent, clutching her champagne glass tightly beneath the golden chandelier light. Wealth recognized power instantly once it revealed itself. Claire hated how predictable that felt. Marcus stepped closer toward Ethan, lowering his voice urgently. "Please," he whispered. "Do not do this publicly." Ethan looked at him with a calmness colder than anger. "You already did." Silence again. Somewhere in the distance, rain had begun tapping softly against the massive gallery windows overlooking the city. The sound mixed strangely with the low hum of nervous whispers spreading through the crowd. Claire suddenly felt exhausted. The adrenaline keeping her upright all evening had begun fading, leaving only embarrassment and confusion behind. She looked down at her hands. Tiny flecks of dried paint still rested beneath her fingernails. She became painfully aware again that she did not belong in rooms like this. Ethan Vale owned half the art world. Marcus Bell managed million-dollar acquisitions. And she was just a woman who restored damaged frames in a cramped apartment, while trying to keep her mother's medical bills paid on time. She quietly stepped backward. I should go, she whispered softly. Ethan turned immediately. Why? Claire almost laughed at the question. Because this is your world, she admitted. Not mine. For the first time all evening, something changed in Ethan's face. Not irritation. Not pity. Sadness. Real sadness. He glanced slowly around the massive gallery hall filled with wealth, crystal light, designer suits, and silent collectors pretending not to eavesdrop. You think this is my world? He asked quietly. Claire frowned slightly, confused. Ethan looked toward the forged painting beneath the spotlight. A room full of people too afraid to tell the truth because money might become uncomfortable? His voice stayed soft. No, Claire. That stopped feeling like my world a very long time ago. The honesty in his words caught her completely off guard. Before Claire could answer, one of the gallery assistants suddenly rushed into the hall holding a tablet with trembling hands. Mr. Vale, the young assistant said nervously. You need to see this immediately. Ethan took the tablet silently. Claire watched the color slowly drain from his face as he read whatever appeared on the screen. And suddenly she understood something terrible. The forged painting was only the beginning.